And we get to this place, and it was like we felt uncomfortable because it was so different. They walked differently, they dressed differently, they talked differently. Hey, this is Ken Shamrock, the world's most dangerous man. Well, former world's most dangerous man. We're chatting with Staxx.
Welcome to this episode of Chatting with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Ken Shamrock. What's up,
What's
Ken?
up? How you doing, brother? Appreciate you having me.
I'm doing great. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So you have a very interesting story and career, and we're going to dive into it today.
That is true. Very true.
So where did it all start for you? Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Macon, Georgia. The home wasn't. Let's just say the home and the neighborhood wasn't good. It was predominantly African American. I was there till I was born. I was born, and then I was there till I was probably 6 or 7. My biological mother was a go-go dancer, and in today's standards, basically a stripper. And she wasn't home a lot, and sometimes when she'd be home, there'd be, kind of different kinds of characters. So that put us in some bad situations where I had 2 older brothers, and we were a year apart from one another. And even in school, because it was predominantly African American, we didn't know any different. Like, we didn't have mirrors in our house, we didn't have a bed, we didn't have toys, barely had food, maybe 1 meal a day. I mean, it was hard. I didn't know it at the time. It's just the way it was. But we didn't see ourselves any different as anybody else around there because we really weren't able to really look at each other, to see the difference, because we just grew up that way, or was growing up that way. And so we were fighting all the time because these kids would go home, and some of them had TVs and they had moms and dads, which we didn't. And they would be talking to them about things that were going on in the world. Even at that young, they were listening to their parents complain and scream and yell at the TV about how these people are being treated in these different neighborhoods and getting beat down by police officers, and those guys are bad. And then those little kids would turn around and look at us, and they were seeing the same things that their parents were angry at. And then when we would go to school, we were literally fighting all the time because these kids were hearing and seeing these things that were absorbed into their heads. And then they would go into these, kindergarten classrooms, or like for myself, I was basically going into a daycare. And even at a young age, a lot of kids, when they're soaking, they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing, but they're seeing and hearing these things in their own home. And then they see us, and then all of a sudden they don't like us. And we didn't know that, and I didn't know that back then. As I got older, we kind of figured it out, the things that were going on. But there was times where people, were breaking into our house because there was no one home. And my brothers were running around. I was pretty young at the time, but they were trying to hold windows down. And this is broad daylight. And my brother hit this girl in the head with this brick at the park because they were beating up. There was like 10 of them beating on me. And he hit one of them in the head. We ran into the house, and they all followed us back to our house and started kicking in the doors and throwing dirt clods through the window and breaking glass. I remember cutting my foot. And parents were standing around screaming because my brother had threw the brick and hit this girl in the face. And I think she was probably 7 or 8. And my brother was at that age. He was the oldest brother. And so the moms were out there and the parents were out there, African American, and screaming and yelling. And it was like they were going to torch our house. And we were stuck inside. And so I remember the police actually showed up, and I couldn't tell you how long, but it felt like forever. And I had crawled under the bed. Obviously, we had one bed in the house, and that was my mom's. Me and my brothers basically slept on the floor. We had one bathroom. no windows, no TV. And so these police officers show up, and it's like a mob out. And we're stuck inside this house, and my brothers aren't letting in. And they're saying, open the door, and they ain't letting them in. And one thing led to another. I remember closing my eyes, and I closed my eyes, and I had no idea. I mean, zero recollection of what happened. The next thing I remember, and this is the honest to God truth, was I was sitting in a '69 Camaro, um, driving back to a place called Napa, California, with the person that she ended up marrying, who was from the military. I don't remember anything else.
So it's just like you blocked it all out, like basically had a blackout.
Well, my brothers told me a little bit of things that had happened, and there was a lot of abuse. Not from my mom. She was hardly a lot of times she wasn't there, and if she was, she had people watching us that weren't good character. So we went through a lot at a real young age. So we moved to Napa, California, which is where this gentleman was from. He was in the military, so you can only imagine when we were sitting in this vehicle, which we didn't have a vehicle. So we were in the '69 Camaro, man, unbelievable. Uh, so I probably was what, 5 at the time, 5 years old, 6 years old at the time. And he's in this vehicle and we're driving, man. It was unbelievable. I mean, like we thought we had it made. Like we'd never seen anything before. And we get to this place called Napa, California. It's predominantly white, right? And we're looking around going, and because where we grew up at, we just thought that was natural. That was the way the world was, right? This is us. This is where we live. This is our community. This is who we are. And we get to this place, and it was like we felt uncomfortable because it was so different. They walked differently, they dressed differently, they talked differently. I mean, we'd never been raised. Like we didn't know what no meant. And here's this military guy. And needless to say, there was more of I think, of a different kind of abuse when we were in Georgia. But when we got to Napa, it became more of a physical, violent kind of abuse. Because this guy's in the military, and every time we didn't do something that he told us to sweep the floor, and we never picked up a broom before, he would smack us in the head because he said we weren't listening. And so it just became like a normal thing that we would be hit, we get beat. And there's a lot of stories that I have that just to where he would test us, and I wouldn't break. I mean, he had to beat me almost to death, but I wouldn't break. And I think at that time I was probably around 9 or 10 when that happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
I dealt with similar situations when I was younger, getting beat by my stepfather. Yeah, it's rough.
It can literally take kids when they're growing up, and people, they look at these young men that grow up, and they look at them and they look down on them, and they look at him as what a thug, what a punk, man. This guy's bad. He's the devil. But they don't know what they went through. They don't know how they grew up. They don't know the lessons that they were taught. Imagine growing up in a family where they were Aryan Brotherhoods. Imagine growing up in a family where they were Crips. Kids don't have a chance. I mean, they are going to be taught to think a certain way. And when we look at them and we start talking to them when they're teenagers and young men, we're already telling them, you guys are bad, you're the devil. Well, how are they not supposed to be? They've never been taught anything else. And if we keep doing that to them without trying to figure out who they are, where they come from, and try to figure out how we can reverse that, then we're going to keep building more prisons, period.
Do you think the military, being raised by a guy in the military, do you or being around him, do you think it gave you a little more structure in your life?
No, I think he tried. He tried, because again, remember, he went into a marriage with three boys that had never been raised, and we were already hellions. I was already fighting in kindergarten. I was kicking kids in the head. I mean, I was already violent and left alone.
Yeah.
And so my brother's the same. So when he tried to come in and tried to establish order at the age of 5, 6, and 7 years old, and into our, till I was 10 before I ran away. I mean, he didn't have a chance. Yeah, he wasn't going to change us. The only thing he was doing was making us tougher by hitting us and smacking us in the head with tools and trying to tell us to do something that we had no clue how to do. He told me to pull weeds and I pulled flowers. And then I got beat for it because I didn't know what a flower was. Just told me to pull something growing out of the ground. I pulled it. And that's kind of the way it was, where there was just that misunderstanding between him and us. And he thought we were just being stupid and that we were being resistant. And the reality of it wasn't that. We just didn't know. We never cleaned a toilet. We never picked up anything to clean anything. We didn't have anything. We didn't even know how to make a bed because we didn't have a bed. So it just, for him to come and say, make your bed, something simple, we would look at him blank eyed and he would hit us in the head. He says, make your bed. Like he really believed like we knew. It was like we didn't.
Yeah.
And
You're
so
just not doing it. Like you're just not doing it.
oh, we're trying to be resistant to him, and that just wasn't it. We just didn't know, and we didn't want to say that, and we were going to say, well, I don't know. We just stared at him, and then of course that would make him angry, and then we would get the beating. But it just got to a point where beatings didn't matter to us. You couldn't break us. You weren't going to break us, and it got to a point where it got so bad that my two brothers ended up in a work camp. I believe it was called the Barrows Boys Work Camp, Barrow, I believe it was called. And I ended up in juvenile hall. At 10 years old, I was locked up because they couldn't put me in the main population because I was too young. The first time I went out was 9.5 or somewhere close to 10, and then ended up going back again at 10. And then I went into placement at 10 years old.
What did you do to land there?
Everything. I robbed cars. I was steal stereos, rims. 10 years old, people, 9, 8, 9, and 10 years old. And then I would be, obviously, I ran away from home and lived out of a car, and I would be robbing kids of their lunch money. When they would be walking to school, I had this blade, and I would go up to them and put it to their throat and tell them to give me their money. And, I was, making money that way. I was obviously stripping cars for a couple people in the hood. And it was Napa during this time. And obviously fighting, I got stabbed behind a 7-Eleven with hanging out with some guys. It was during school time. I never went to school. And a bunch of guys showed up and we got in it and I got stabbed, ended up in the hospital. And that was when I woke up handcuffed to a bed because I was on the run at that time. And they fingerprinted. I got, woke up, I was handcuffed to the bed. And that's when I started into the system. And I went to several group homes and they were horrible. I mean, the sheets stunk, the bed stunk, the houses had holes in the walls, and dudes were smoking weed behind the house. And I mean, it was just chaos, right? And it just had no feeling of a sense or kindness or care for anything. And only thing I cared about was me and how do I get through the day. And everybody else was, in the way. And so that's the kind of way I lived for a while, all the way through group homes. And I went to a work camp at this one house where it was a sheriff that lived there, and they were having me digging pools and digging ditches and all these other stuff. And I ended up running away from there. And after probably about 3 or 4 different placements at the age of 13, and I spent most of my time in juvenile hall because I go on the run, I get caught. I ended up at the Shamrock Boys Home at 13 years old. And the crazy thing about the Shamrock Boys Home was that I didn't know it at the time, but I remember hearing everybody saying this place is the bomb. And I never heard anybody say anything like that because, Napa was a hub for this Shamrock Boys Home. But the only way you can go to the Shamrock Boys Home as if you were on your last leg. Like, other than this is your hope to go there. If you can't make it here, you're going to CYA. And so I kept hearing these things. And I remember Bob Shamrock came to talk to me while I was in the hall. And I remember talking to him, and he was different, right? Still didn't trust him. I didn't trust anybody, right? They all tell you something, and next thing you know, it's completely different than what they said.
Right.
And so I just didn't trust anybody. And so I remember there was this guy named Jeff Ainsworth and Sean Green. And Jeff Ainsworth wanted to kill me, literally wanted to kill me, because he was from our neighborhood, and there was stuff that went on. And it was more from my brother Robbie, my middle brother. They had this beef, and he fought him like twice. Robbie beat him up twice because Bob, this other guy who was my mom's husband at the time, would allow those guys to come to our house in the backyard behind the fence, because we were right next to the school, Pueblo Vista School. And they could come over there, and he'd let them fight in the backyard. Just don't do it at school, because we were always fighting. He said, listen, I'm not stopping this, but you guys bring him here. So Robbie brought him over 2 different times and beat the hell out of him twice. And so he obviously wasn't happy, and I was getting placed into this group home with Sean Green, who was cool with me. And I believe he was 16, and Jeff was 16, and I was 13. And I remember going to this group home, and we were all in the same car, and a parole officer was driving us up to a place called Susanville, California. And we started going out of the city. And remember, I lived in Macon and I lived in Napa. And here we are driving. All of a sudden, we start going through the Sierra Mountains, and we're going through mountains, and I'm going, oh, where are we going? Like, I literally never saw this. I'm thinking we're getting taken to the backwoods here.
Yeah.
We ain't coming out. And but we get there, we pull into this house, and it was unbelievable, because I remember when we pulled in there, I was like, where we turning around? Because when we pulled into the house, it was a mansion. I mean, it was beautiful, and it was huge. And we're thinking to ourselves, what are we turning around? We miss it? And we're trying to, because there's no way we're here at all. And so the guy pulls in and pulls into the thing, and there's a Corvette sitting in front. There's this Riviera, it's a plush Riviera. And we're just like, what the heck? Like, we get out of the car, and he goes, oh, this is it. And I was like, immediately I'm thinking to myself, I'm out of here. I mean, get it. Most people are like, what are you talking about? Dude, anytime you go to something like this, there's something wrong. You don't get this treatment unless there's something weird. And I ain't having it. You know, I've been through some stuff in my life that this ain't happening. This ain't happening. And I remember walking in, I was on defensive, man. It was like, And we get up this big oak door, we knock on it, and he opens the door, we walk in, and I mean, it was like walking into Disneyland, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Clean.
wow.
Nice and clean in there.
Video games up there, pool table up the stairs. To the right, there was a grand piano, a white grand piano. It had this big oak ceiling where there was like, I don't even know how tall it was way up there. Then they had this brick fireplace. It was huge, right? I mean, it took up the whole middle of the room, and it would go all the way up to the open beam ceilings and go out. And it had this plush carpet. It looked like silk. And then we walk in, and we see this bar, and it was filled with Coke and candy and ice cream. And I was like, here, little kitty, come talk to daddy. I mean, in my head, all this is going through, like, dude, these dudes are weird. Like, they got some sort of perv going on here. And there's this big oak table, and it had 18 seats at it. And they had pewter goblets and pewter plates and silverware and linen napkins stuck inside the pewter goblets, already set. And this is in the afternoon. And it looked like we were walking into some gladiator feast or something. And you walk into the living room, and there was this big screen TV, this wraparound couch, kids wrestling everywhere. And I was just numb, going, tense, like, this, what's happening? And I remember Bob comes in, hey, how you doing? He's got this, cheerful personality, and how you guys doing, man? Good to have you. And we're like, and he comes over and tries to hug guys. And of course, Jeff did, and Sean, and I'm like, I pushed away, like, don't touch me. Like, hey, whoa, And I mean, I remember I'm 13, right? And I got an attitude beyond an attitude. And of course, he senses it right away. And so he brings us in, he sits us at the bar, and he asks if he wants something to drink. And I'm like, hell no. They're all like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, nah. I want to figure out there's no drugs
Never
in
been
this
treated like this though in your life.
ever. Like this, the only time somebody offers you something, sorry, I lost my earpiece. The only time somebody offers you something is if they want something from you, and it ain't good. And so I remember as he sits us at this table, and the probation officer's there, and he told the probation officer, "Hey, why don't you go ahead and go over there and sit down?" They had a chef, a cook. Her name was Granny, and asked her, and she would take the probation officer and give him some coffee, some cookies. She'd show him around the house and got him out of the way. Well, that never happened. They always took us and gave us to some peer kid, and he would take us and show us the ropes, show us where the dope, show us where you hide out, all the bad things, right?
Yeah.
Well, he sent the probation officer away.